Council. I am Gio Tomasi, Chair of the Council Board of Directors. Um, Connecticut has many resources across multiple industries: aerospace, medical devices, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, additive manufacturing, and shipbuilding, just to name a few. And our state's greatest resource is knowledge. The objective of the Tech Talks is to share this knowledge across industries. We have topics that will range from cybersecurity, as we're talking today. So thanks, Maureen, for agenda, to artificial intelligence, to the resources we have available from our universities and research centers, to Industry 4.0, and many others from the knowledge centers. We urge you to explore across industries because what is directly applicable and essential today to one specific industry, such as cybersecurity for companies working with the Department of Defense, can also benefit other industries by making you more resilient to cyber attacks and theft of IP. So please enjoy this presentation by Pat Fisher, President and CEO of Janus Associates. And please participate by engaging the panel with your questions and comments in the Q&A. So with that, let me turn it over to Matt Cohen, Vice President of Research and Development for Medtronics, that will introduce Pat. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gio. Really appreciate the introduction there and the context. And welcome everybody to one of many seminars that CTC will be hosting. I am, as Gio had mentioned, Matt Cohen, Vice President of Research and Development at Medtronic down in North Haven, Connecticut. And just to reinforce one of the things that Gio had mentioned is the abundance of different technological domains in industries across Connecticut. This is a great example that I wanted to raise. So my organization, Medtronic, is obviously in the medical device field, but cybersecurity is something that is important to us as well. So when you look at whether it's automotive, aerospace, defense industry, it's one of those things we're all looking at. So to reinforce Gio's point, the opportunity for us to look across different industries and share best practices, share lessons learned within the state of Connecticut, I think is a huge value proposition for those industries that are in the state of Connecticut. So just wanted to reinforce that point, Gio. It's a great one. Without any further ado, let me introduce Pat Fisher. Pat is president of Janus Associates and has a background of over 32 years in the information security and technology field. She founded Janus back in 1988, and it was the first independent firm in the United States specializing in information risk management, information technology controls, security, and business continuity for government and industry. So with that, Pat, let me turn things over to you and we can jump right into your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt and Gio. Let me share my screen, if I can do that.
And just while you're sharing your screen, Pat, thank you. One thing I did forget to mention is please enter any questions that you might have. There is a button bottom center of your screen, Q&A. And post anything that's on your mind or anything you'd like to hear a little bit more about. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a few minutes and we'll go through those questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So today's presentation is entitled the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Another one of those terribly named federal programs known better as the CMMC. And what we want to discuss with you today is why it's important to business people here in Connecticut. We need to understand and determine how this process might affect our businesses, both for good and for bad, because it could do either for you. The chances are if your products and services eventually wind up at the Department of Defense or service some other larger company whose products or services go there, this is going to affect you. Adhering to the CMMC in the future could lead to increased business, but not following this might badly hurt your future if you want to do business eventually or at some level with the DoD or DoD prime contractors. There's a great deal of confusion in the marketplace right now about the CMMC, and smaller companies have little idea, from what I've been able to determine, of how dramatically this new regulation could affect them. So we're here today to try to help you understand the basics of what's involved and what you need to do to begin your efforts to comply. Let's see if this will work. Okay, there. So we're going to address a few things today. You know, what is the CMMC? Where did it come from? What its relevance is to you? What does it involve? And what actions do we take? And then after that, we'll handle questions for you. So first of all, what is the CMMC? The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is certainly a mouthful, hard to say, better known as the CMMC, is a new requirement from the DoD that companies are going to need to meet if they want to be a contractor or a subcontractor on a variety of US DoD contracts. The requirement focuses on data which you might have as part of your deliverables or designs, notations, etc., that the DoD has categorized as being critical to protection of the United States. It consists of data that the DoD has labeled confidential but unclassified, CUI. You're going to hear that term a lot in the future if your business deals with the DoD. Or federal contract information, known as FCI, which the DoD wants carefully protected, but that itself doesn't rise to the level of secret data. Both of those, they come below secret. That's what's included in both of these categories. As you can see on the slide, this can apply to all the kinds of things I noted before: drawings, data, emails, contract information, or anything else that the DoD and your prime contractor, if you're not the prime contractor, has identified. If these types of data are handled by your company, you're going to need to meet these new requirements and be able to prove that you do meet them. And that last part is going to become the most important element of this program. Your business success is going to depend on your becoming familiar with them both and complying with them both. So let's talk just for a moment about data classification. You can see these 6 categories here. Data is classified based on its sensitivity to the needs of the federal government. And there are various levels: restricted, public trust, confidential, et cetera, each with an increasing degree of sensitivity. Data that's been deemed CUI, confidential, unclassified information, is a new level of sensitive data at the top of the unclassified scale, just below public trust. But let's step back just a little bit. Why do we need another level of restriction for data? And what's the background of the CMMC process, and why has it come about? Okay. For many years, our Defense Department has found that critical data has been leaking to nation states who are our adversaries. You've probably read about this in the press, over and over and over again. DoD personnel have spent an increasing amount of time trying to close leaks of data. In fact, if we look simply at the F-35 fighter program alone, as long ago as 2013, the Pentagon reported to the US Senate that sensitive design data leaks, although not classified, had become a major problem, particularly when China revealed its J-31 fighter that, after a reported theft of US data, appeared to be surprisingly modeled after the US's F-35. And it came out very shortly after the F-35 was announced. The F-35 is not alone. Both Russia and China have been identified as recipients of multiple US warfighting data. Based on a variety of cyber thefts, as reported to Congress, by several directors of national intelligence over the years. During the same period, DoD was pressing federal contractors and their thousands of subcontractors to secure data. The DoD reports that these businesses repeatedly reported that the data they handled was secure, but the thefts continued. DoD finally decided that its business partners either did not understand how to protect data or they were lying. And the DoD came right out and said, we think a lot of people are lying. And thus a new process was needed to protect our country and its data. This is why the CMMC was born. And it applies to companies who create, house, or transmit sensitive data labeled as confidential, unclassified information, or federal contract information. The DoD already had a set of data sensitivity controls that are now known as NIST 800-171 for controlling data in non-federal systems. That is by you and me and other businesses. DoD took this set of controls and made them the standard for DoD contractors and subcontractors. Therefore, this is the base of the set of controls to which you'll need to comply. If you're not a DoD supplier, you're not off the hook. NASA has already informed DoD that it's seriously considering adopting the CMMC as are a variety of other civilian agencies who are very interested in this. And as data has gotten more important further down the line, even data breaches such as the large Equifax one a couple of years ago can be used to try to compromise government workers or suppliers, which is a big worry today. So data security has become much more of a national priority. The eventual outcome of all these types of issues and events was that DoD finally gave up tolerating data being stolen and is putting in place requirements that will hit everyone where it hurts most, right in their pocketbooks. Now, the CMMC levels, it consists of what you see on the screen, from 1 to 5, basic to advanced. The government has laid these out and expects you to adhere to one of these if you want to do business with DoD. I'm here to tell you not to even think about levels 4 and 5 right now. Don't even try to go there. In fact, it's not even known what types of businesses will be required to get to that level, unless you're a hydraulics business or something like that that is needed in a very specific way. Unless you have excellent controls already, it's going to be difficult enough to achieve level 3. And as you can see on the slide, if you're working at level 1, there's 17 various practices that you need to comply with. And each of those practices has a number of controls. It's not just 1 out of 17. And if you go to level 2, you have to add another 72, and so on. The DoD has stated recently that most contracts will not require above a level 3 or lower. So at the most, I would not go higher than that. I would start with level 3. Now, what's the relevance to us? Why do we as participants need to pay attention to this? First, adhering to this CMMC will be a requirement if your company is awarded a DoD contract, depending on the sensitivity of how the government perceives your data. The DoD will decide in new contracts what the level of data sensitivity should be, and that'll be printed right on the RFI, RFP, or contract. And that data level will be from 1 to 5, which is the most critical. If you're a subcontractor to a DoD prime contractor, your prime contractor will alert you to the requirement level in the same manner that the DoD alerted them. It'll be right on the front page of the contract, supposedly, or in the RFI or RFP. At each of the levels, there are a cumulative set of security controls, which you will need to ensure that are in place. And you're going to have the ability to provide proof. You're going to need to hire an independent team of DoD licensed certifiers. And there's a whole process for certifying independent groups that will come out and certify and license you. And they will report the results back to DoD. through a designated reporting mechanism, which DoD has said will be a reimbursable expense for you. So you will get some cost reimbursement. However, getting to the compliance level, whether it's your 1 through 5, you're going to need the level that you will need will be on your own dime. Having adequate security controls in place is something you were supposed to be doing already. And the DoD is adamant that they're not going to pay for you getting to the level of the controls. But the important thing to know for today's purpose is that your company won't be able to circumvent these controls if you expect to do business with the DoD. So how are you going to comply? And what does that involve? There's several steps to achieving compliance. You're going to need to have what's termed a system security plan. That's a document that lays out the specific security controls in your particular environment and how you control data applicable to the level you plan to adhere to. You'll also need something called a plan of actions and milestones, or better known as a POAM, which is a remediation plan, so that the government will be able to know what you plan to do and by when to achieve compliance as needed. So right now, as of last December 1st, November 30th, each company who is or wants to be a DoD contractor or subcontractor at any level where the possibility of confidential but unclassified data or specific federal contract information might be involved is required to submit to the DoD an initial score based on your own self-assessment against specific DoD controls appropriate to the level you plan. And that's correct. I said self-assessment, but don't think that that's going to be very easy, because it's going to be much more rigorous than probably anything you've ever done before. All the controls that we're discussing are based on NIST 800-171, which has 110 different controls in 14 various families, with at least 2 new families being discussed for addition. DoD has identified them as being necessary for each sensitivity level, and you're going to report on your current level of compliance to the level to which you plan to adhere. Or, if you plan to adhere to level 3, you can still report now to level 2 or 1 for the time being. But what you should be doing is to do this immediately, since it took effect last November 30th at the close of business. And you should base this on your current ability to prove a specific level of compliance, levels 1 through 5. If you believe you're going to require a level 3, you should try to develop your POAM to that level, the POAM that will result from your self-assessment, so that you can begin working to get your controls in place to achieve level 3 requirements when the government independent certifiers that you need to hire actually begin to certify you at some later date when your controls are in place. You're going to need to do this and submit this score by establishing an account in the DoD Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS. You should get yourself registered now, even if you're not ready to submit that self-assessment, so that you're ready when you have the self-assessment done. Along with your score, your company's going to need to submit a plan of actions and milestones, a POAM, that we discussed a few minutes ago, that will illustrate to the government what your plans are to guide your activities and get you to that, to that future level of security that you anticipate your contracts will require if you're not currently in compliance with them. Third, you're going to need to prepare that document we mentioned called the System Security Plan that specifically documents each cybersecurity control within each practice area. You saw that on the chart of levels. For the sensitivity level you've identified as your goal for your own company and environment. Now, how are you going to comply on an ongoing basis? With your system security plan and your plan of actions and milestones, as you get the controls in place, you're going to need to keep them up to date periodically. And in government verbiage, this typically means at least annually, or when a major security or IT change happens. Don't make the mistake of placing these documents on a shelf and forgetting them, like so many companies have done with business continuity plans over the years. That will not work with these new rules. At least annually, you're going to need to review that system security plan and that POAM to determine if controls need to change. If so, document them. If not, note that you made a review and document the date along with the SSP. So if the government came in to do an audit, they would know you took a look at them and they were still in place. There are a few additional things you're going to need, such as how you're going to be able to detect security incidents if and when they happen, and how you're going to make reports to the government or to your prime contractor, and how you're going to manage any subcontractors your own company has. Remember, they're also going to need to comply with the requirements for your contract. So those two things you can't forget about. How long do you have to do all this? Well, the government has stated that the full rollout is scheduled for 2026. But don't let that let you sit back and say, well, I have plenty of time to do this, because you don't. The first contract RFIs and RFPs are now beginning to flow through the system. So if you're going to be competing on a contract, you might see those requirements coming out within the next couple of months. You might not see them for 2 years or 3 years. But if you haven't gone through the self-assessment process and entered your self-assessment score, how will your prime contractors know that you're serious about participating in whatever project they might be considering you for? They might even think that they have to replace you with another contractor or subcontractor who does have a score, does have controls in place, and is adhering to the rules. If your company doesn't meet the requirements established by the specific contract on which you plan to bid, by the time it's awarded, the DoD says that you will not be allowed to be awarded the contract or subcontract. And this carries through all levels of contracting. So you need to be very serious about this. So where should you start? Begin by focusing on your own security protections. Don't gloss them over. You need to assign someone or hire someone who can understand what your requirements might be for your own business, as well as what you currently have in place. And begin the process of getting the self-assessment, the POAM, and the SSP produced so that you can report your initial score to DoD. And then begin getting the required environment in place. Don't be shocked if you obtain a negative score in the area of -200 or lower. This was the first big shock that most contractors had when reporting back to DoD that they had minus scores and couldn't understand how that could happen. But DoD said, nope, we understand this isn't uncommon, but your goal is to move your way up to 110 on the plus side. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do that overnight, or even perhaps in a few months. But you need to start somewhere, or you're never going to get to the finish line and be able to compete. The entire process is complex and will not be easy, even for companies that understand all the requirements. It's going to be important to get started, even though you may not have a contract immediately. But it is going to be necessary if your business is going to have any opportunity to work with an increasing set of federal government customers, beginning with the DoD. In fact, as I mentioned at the beginning, civilian agencies, in addition to DoD, such as NASA right now, are showing signs of wanting to use the same scale of data security conformance. Cybersecurity is not going to get easier, and you're going to need to focus on your own environment to understand how you can meet possible controls, and then move towards compliance with all those standards. You know, the DoD says it's up to all of us to protect our country, and DoD is determined to ensure that all of us take this seriously. And they've said over and over in meetings that I attend, it's obvious that many of their contractors have been skirting this. So they want us to get very serious about this. I know this is a lot to take in a very short period of time. And I hope it's not been too confusing. It is a complex operation. So now if we have any questions, we can discuss them. Matt, you want to take over from here?
Certainly. Thank you, Pat.
Mhm.
Appreciate that presentation and all the information. That was great. A lot of parallels to what you had presented, again, to medical device industry and what the FDA, as well as other OUS regulatory agencies are asking us for in terms of our software operated devices. So very pertinent to, again, multiple industries. We do have a couple questions, Pat. Looks like we have about 5 so far in the hopper, and hopefully we can get to all of them. The first one is from Jess. Does CMMC apply to software, I think it's as a service providers, SaaS, to DoD or related third parties?
This will apply to related third parties if it's not COTS production, which is sold generally available. If you're working on a contract and you're working to produce components or custom work, then you definitely have to comply with CMMC. And that question has been asked a lot, and there's not a definitive answer yet, but for the most part, you're probably going to have to comply. Unless you're selling to the general marketplace.
Okay. Next question from Jess as well. How does this compare to FedRAMP?
Well, FedRAMP is a secure environment that contractors can go in to meet federal agency requirements. The CMMC is a requirement for all commercial operations who wish to do business with the DoD. So while FedRAMP is a whole environment for your computing system, CMMC is not. It's what you're going to do in your particular environment to comply with specific requirements.
Okay, thank you. Will the DoD certifier process be similar to other cyber-related audits, i.e. SOC 2?
It has some similarities. Some of the differences are this is going to be completely related to cybersecurity data. There won't be a financial component to it or anything like that, for financial controls or typically those kinds of controls. The audit process, since the NIST 800-171 is the base of these controls, that was taken from NIST 853, which is a larger set of similar controls that federal agencies are responsible for. And NIST 171 was, that's my shorthand for it, 800-171 was a subset of those. Pretty large subset though, obviously. And the type of audit that you may be familiar with, proving your control with artifacts and documentation, is exactly what this is going to be. This is not vulnerability testing for the most part. There probably will rarely be anything like that. This is auditability.
All right, thank you again. Moving on, Rich has asked a question here. And by the way, thank you, Jess, for those questions. Rich has asked a question. I hear that not having SSP is an automatic 0 score on the self-assessment. Is that true?
Not having SSP, a system security plan? Is that what your question is? I'm going to assume.
The way that it's written, yes.
Okay. No. Well, that is a confusing question, and nobody has a solid answer on some of this. DoD is going through changes every single week. But if you don't have a system security plan, you don't know what controls you're working with. So it would be very difficult to get any score at all if you didn't know what controls you were trying to adhere to. And the system security plan is the document that lists each of the controls in your environment and how you're going to comply with them. So while there's not an automatic 0, you won't be able to comply with any of the controls. So in effect, you will wind up with probably a 0 or a minus 200 or 300.
Makes sense. Another question from Mitchell, and he's asking about minimum frequency. And the question is there a minimum frequency that CMMC reviews need to be done annually, quarterly?
There's a review process every 3 years that you'll have to go through. But remember, if you should update your documentation every year at the least, or whenever there's a major IT or security change. And a lot of organizations don't do that, but the government's going to become more stringent, and an auditor could pop in at some point and take a look at, your operation. So you need to take that into consideration. This is no longer going to be how little can I do. It's going to be what's the right thing for the business that I'm in.
All right, and next question is from Aaron. Does the CMMC overlap with ITAR? ITAR?
Well, I've just heard it at one of the recent meetings that I was in that yes, to some extent, and I don't know to how much at this point, ITAR controls certainly affect CMMC, so there is at least some overlap.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And looks like we have at least 2 more questions here. So for the participants, please keep them coming in. I have another one from, or the first one from Teresa. Does the CMMC flow down requirements to subcontractors that don't handle FCI or CUI? And I hope you know what these acronyms are.
I
these
do,
initials
I
are,
do.
Pat, because I sure don't.
FCI is federal contract information. CUI is controlled and classified information. If your contract does not require CUI or FCI, no, you don't have to comply with these. However, if you don't have CUI, you still have federal contract information. So if federal contract information is contained in your contract, and your prime contractor will let you know, or DOD, then you will have some level of requirement. And that might be level 2 or 1, even down as far as 1. So you have to be careful, because don't assume that just because all you have is a contract and contract data that you have no compliance requirement. But it may certainly not be at level 3.
Excellent. Next question is from Jess. Does CMCC take into account data being stored or transmitted on blockchain?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but if Maureen, if you would make a quick note of that, I will find out, and we'll try to get back to this respondent if you would put your contact information in the questions and answer.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat. Now it looks like we do have one more question that came in through the chat feature. How should a small business perform penetration testing to meet NIST requirements? This seems very onerous. Will CMMC require 100% score to meet CMMC requirements at a given level? What happens if you can't do penetration testing or some of the more advanced controls?
Well, remember, you have to submit a plan of actions and milestones, known as a POAM. And if you're almost at the level that you need to be at for your contract requirements, talk to the government or talk to your prime contractor and try to find out if they will help you with your requirements. Penetration testing is not necessarily where you should be going. You have to look at the various controls that your data will require, and you have to get those controls in place, not necessarily penetration testing. So you have to focus on things like, how do you access data? And that's called the access control family. There are a bunch of controls in access control, a bunch of individual practices in access control. You have to read those and see how you would comply with them, not necessarily through penetration testing. So don't get all involved in doing a penetration test when you may not have to go down that route. And let me just add something here. There are a number of organizations out there, commercial organizations, sending out emails and marketing materials saying that they are certifiers for CMMC. There are no licensed certifiers out there right now, except for a very few pilot organizations that have been working with DoD to figure out the process, figure out the training. In fact, they're still designing some of the training. Don't get caught up in somebody telling you they can get you certified for CMMC. That is definitely not going on right now. This is the time to get your compliance in place and make sure you can get as high a score as possible. Now, there are some things in those controls that will be easier than others. Perhaps physical environment will be easier for you. You lock your doors, your data center is locked, or your data servers are secured, things like that. And then there's some like access control or system integrity that might be more difficult. So you've got two different kinds of controls to look at there, just in those two examples I gave. So look at what the CMC requires. Look at the 110 controls in CMMC itself. You can go online and find them and see where you can begin. One of the things I suggest you do is make it easier on yourself to design a system security plan that you can actually insert your auditable documents and artifacts as a notation right in the system security plan. So when it's done, you know what you've got, you would know where to find it when an auditor comes in, and you can tick these off one by one to come into compliance. You know, you don't climb a mountain by just making a big jump. You take one step after another, and that's what this is. It's a mountain. That's all, Matt.
Okay. Well, I think that completes the questions. Actually, we just had another one come in. It said, how perfect must you be in meeting requirements to get CMMC certification? Will you have a bit of leeway?
This is a personal opinion. This is not coming from the government. Having been in this industry a long time, if you're doing a good job of trying to get there and you're making progress regularly, I think you stand a very good chance of having the government work with you. But you can't just let it go and then say, oh, but I'm trying. The government's not going to believe you. So you've got to show that you're doing your best, you're trying to get there. You're going to be able to meet requirements at some point in the future, and hopefully the not too distant future. And I have always found that the government tries very hard to work with smaller organizations. But there are lots of companies vying for business with the DoD. 350,000 contractors and subcontractors. So it's going to help us all in this region of the country to get our businesses aligned with these requirements so that we can expand and become strong companies with the government. We have the technology. Now we need to put in the controls.
Excellent. Well, Pat, let me start to wrap things up here. We're at about a quarter of. So, and I know we wanted to end a little bit early, but wanted to say thank you. You've been very gracious with your expertise and knowledge in this area. And as Cheryl had mentioned in the chat, you know, I think we all need guidance in this area. It's obviously very complex, and navigating our way through this requires expertise like yours.
It is
Thank you very
complex.
much.
You're very welcome.
Yep, thank you. Definitely. All right, and with that, Gio, I don't know if you had any closing comments, but I think we're at the finish line here.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pat, for a really good presentation, a good overview of how complex this is, and Matt for handling the questions. And I can tell you, as a DoD supplier, this is quite a task. We're going through it right now, Pat, and you really
Yes.
said it well. It is not an option. It's something that you must have. But I really believe that, like you said, we have the expertise within the Tech Council, within the state of Connecticut, that we can really help companies comply and become stronger. Because again, it will not be an option, it will be an absolute necessity for the DoD, but it's now flowing down to other entities within the government. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us, for those great questions, and for putting together an outstanding presentation, Pat.
You're very welcome.
So with that, we will close and hope to see everybody again next month. And please let your colleagues and associates know of the Tech Council, some of these programs that we are offering.
All right, Gio, thank you. And thanks to you, Pat, again, and all of the attendees, and for some of those great questions. Really appreciate it. I know Maureen is going to make a recording of this and the slides available, so please look out for that on the CTC website. With that, I think we can close the webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.